parasites that are passed through the environment make up a big portion of the burden of disease in people and livestock. Ultimately, I'm interested in finding ways to interrupt the transmission of these parasites and lower the risk for people. If we understand better how these parasites move through the environment, it's really going to open up a lot of new options. Just because we have a medical option doesn't mean that option is attainable or affordable or scalable. Schistosomiasis is a human parasitic disease caused by a small worm that lives in the blood vessels. The worm lives in us, in humans, but it passes through the river environment. Lurking underneath the water in these places where schistosomiasis is endemic is particular species of freshwater snails that carry the parasite.
There are more than 220 million people that are currently infected with schistosomiasis. The vast majority are school-age children in sub-Saharan Africa.
It's a disease of poverty that is spread through the lack of access to safe water, essentially, and lack of access to sanitation. The way a person contracts schistosomiasis is just by stepping in the water. Parasite is free swimming, attaches to our skin, burrows through the skin, and ends up making a migration through our body.
Mooy sangu dan fiy sangu di fi fóot loolu daal loolu la ñuy def ci dex gi waaw à part napp bi waaw activité bi sangu la ak fóot ak naan dan ciy naan tamit dan ciy tànk di ci naan waaw ci forage bi amee problème.
Schistosomiasis is a big problem anywhere where the environment is perfect to host the snails that carry the parasite. That environment is becoming more prevalent as we're disrupting the food webs and the native species that live in these freshwater rivers and streams all over the tropical world. Northern Senegal is one of the highest transmission areas for schistosomiasis in the world. Many of the villages that we've been working in, 98 or 99% of the kids are infected with the parasite. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, but one of the main ones is an ecological reason. In the mid-1980s, a dam was built on the Senegal River, which changed the ecology of the region in both beneficial and detrimental ways.
The dam is effective in preventing saltwater intrusion and in fostering the development of agriculture, but it came along with unexpected side effects.
With the expansion of fresh water to support agriculture also came the expansion of snail habitat.
After the completion of the dam in 1987, an increasing number of cases of schistosomiasis were reported.
Folks have speculated for a long time about the link between dams and schisto. One thing that we think has been overlooked is the fact that these dams also eliminate native river prawns in the above dam reaches of the river. And these prawns were once a really important predator of the snails that carry schistosomiasis.
Before the Diama Dam was built in Senegal, the native prawn migrated up and down the river every year, potentially multiple times throughout its life cycle. When the prawns were abundant, they were both scavenging plant material but also snails. We actually believe that prawns are particularly interested in snails because of the calcium in their shells. The prawns really need the calcium to build their own exoskeleton. After the dam was built, the upriver habitat became inaccessible to the migrating prawns. Essentially, the snail populations were left to grow unchecked.
You need to have this very specific type of snails to complete the life cycle of the parasite. They penetrate the snails and they basically hijack the snails and transform the snail as a factory to reproduce more and more parasites.
The single larval parasite entering the snail can become 100,000 parasites exiting the snail looking for human hosts.
The parasites is incredibly long-living in the human host.
The worms can live up to 30 years, causing all kinds of both very severe and also very subtle disease.
C'est une maladie d'une très forte morbidité. Les enfants sont fatigués et donc, par ce fait, ont un problème de cognitif qui fait qu'ils ne peuvent pas apprendre à l'école correctement et ils ont vraiment de grosses difficultés.
By the time people reach adolescence and young adulthood, and they've been infected this whole time, they can start to develop really severe symptoms, including liver failure, bladder cancer, and these kind of things that are very life-threatening. Since the 1980s, there has been a drug that can treat schistosomiasis. It's a relatively inexpensive and effective drug. The problem is that it doesn't have a very long-lasting effect.
When we treat the people in these rural villages, we remove the parasite from these people, but basically the same day they go back to transmission sites at rivers, on the lakes, or in temporary ponds with contaminated water. They get reinfected just the same day.
And so there's somewhat of a treadmill of treatment, exposure, infection, treatment that a lot of communities in these developing countries are experiencing. We've seen at least 50 years of concerted effort by the global health community to distribute the drug praziquantel and not a significant rollback of the global burden of the disease. So we really are trying to think more creatively, think more systemically, think about the ecology itself and how that can inform ways to truly make a dent in the global burden of schistosomiasis. One way that we could solve this problem while maintaining the dam is if we can bring prawns back to this ecosystem through aquaculture. We can grow them in a protected setting in the hatchery. And then when they get to a big enough size that they're going to start to eat snails, we can deliver some of those prawns to the villages where schistosomiasis is endemic.
We have started a process along with our scientific partner in Senegal to do research and development for the domestication of the native prawns in Senegal.
So far, we've been able to build a small prawn hatchery, but even a small prawn hatchery can actually produce millions of prawns. We showed that the people living near the protected water, the water protected with prawns, had a lower reinfection rate than the people in the control village nearby. So the next phase that we're entering right now is really trying to understand whether or not we can have both an economically sustainable and ecologically sustainable disease solution that we can take to the rest of the developing world that has schistosomiasis. We know that these prawns were already caught by fishermen hundreds of years ago. We have record of this. They were also reported in history as artisanal fisheries.
We certainly believe that small-scale aquaculture activity could provide a source of protein for the local population and also a source of potential revenue.
Early on in our research, we asked ourselves, could a valuable native predator really be a solution to reduce a human disease when they're going to be heavily fished? Based on my observations of the prawns in the laboratory, it's actually the very small prawns that do the best job of eating snails. When they become large, this is when they're optimal for harvest. This is when their value is the highest to fishermen. But it's really when they're smaller that they're doing most of the work to eat snails to control the disease. So it turns out in this particular case that harvest and disease control are kind of a win-win. You can get both at the same time. Our hope is that we can bring investment into this solution. We're now working with social impact MBA students to do market analyses, to understand how we could set up essentially a business in Senegal and in other areas like Senegal to bring prawns, rebuild a fishery, and couple that with partnerships with the ministries of health to deliver at least some of the prawns for disease reduction to the villages that need them.
There are, shockingly, many diseases, just like schistosomiasis, that have these environmental components to their transmission. More and more ecologists are jumping into the fray when it comes to public health, and it's a really exciting thing to be involved in.
It's really about studying a whole system. It's really about understanding not just what's going on inside of a person, but understanding how all of us are connected. All of us are connected to the environment, and especially the natural world, the natural environment that we live in.